Welcome to Risk Engineers Talk Governance. In this special episode, due diligence engineers Richard Robinson and Gaye Francis preview their upcoming live forum, Preventing Criminal Manslaughter, Understanding and Implementing SFAIRP. You can join Richard and Gaye with special guests, lawyer Joseph Coleiro and architect Dr. Frank Stoks, on Tuesday the 22nd of October, 9am to 12:15. Tickets are available for the event in Melbourne, or you can join us online, and you can find the link for tickets in the description.
Hi Richard, welcome to a special podcast session today.
Okay, I'm glad apparently you've moved out of your house to repair it, but that's nice.
Yes, it's been a very stressful weekend, but I've got my work hat on now, so all good. So today's podcast, we're going to talk about our upcoming live forum event, and it's Preventing Criminal Manslaughter, Understanding and Implementing SFAIRP. And so what we want to do for our audience today was give them a little bit of an overview of what to expect at the forum and go from there. So I think you were going to run through a quick briefing on the program.
Yep.
And then we'll talk us through what some of the issues we hope to come up in the discussion on.
Yeah, well, thanks, Gaye. And basically we've got Joe Coleiro, who's a lawyer and legal counsel. For those you might have heard us talk about him before, he was the legal counsel for the Defence Aviation Safety Authority, where they defined what SFAIRP was. And we've got Dr. Frank Stoks, who's one of our associates from New Zealand, who has a particular interest in the design and the way in which things on the foreshore, because he was acting as an expert witness for a young fellow that got killed or drowned in Wellington Harbour.
Correct.
And he's been through the legal process in New Zealand, and he had a number of insights that he wanted to express about all that. This sort of flows on from the continuing argument debate we have over the SFAIRP and ALARP business, which is sort of, we find, has gone to a strange place.
And the broader concepts of target levels of risk and safety in general.
But because we sort of have these, it is actually sort of an integration of these 3 points of view. Now, obviously, if you've been listening to our podcast, you've probably got a pretty good idea what we think about it all. But part of the reason for having the other two there is to actually make it clear that this is actually a more complicated matter than it looks. Now, just to sort of put it into perspective, Gaye will be running the show, as she usually does, and introducing us all. And therefore, there'll be Gaye's points at the end of it summarising the results of what we heard, the takeaways. And then in order, it was going to be me sort of outlining the relationship between the laws of man and the laws of nature. And there's a number of ways that could be expressed. I think I've probably expressed them in previous podcasts. But the essential point is that if you're a designer designing things, you have to eliminate hazards so far as reasonably practicable. If you can't eliminate them, you've got to reduce them so far as reasonably practical. And that's the physical, natural, material, time-space universe. And I could expand that a number of different ways, which you've probably heard me do before. And you have to do that because you're not allowed to change the world, like build a building and create a fire hazard or fail to put up a handrail and stop some young fellow drowning in a harbour. You have to do that in a way which is not negligent.
Yep.
That means you weren't reckless and you looked at all the problems that could occur and satisfy the laws of man. And the laws of man have got particularly tough with all its criminal manslaughter provisions saying, this is the way the world ought to be physically. That's what the designers are supposed to do. That's what engineers and architects do. And you've got to do that in a way which satisfies the laws of man, which is what our courts and parliaments do. And this SFAIRP business is in everybody's legislation, and it's basically a categorical imperative, to use Kant's meaning of the word. Now, the thing
I think in that legal context, we've also talked about in other podcasts, is the complexities and the interactions between the WHS, OHS legislation with other types of legislation as well. So the complexity around the legal context of health and safety issues is becoming quite, there's a lot of things feeding into it.
Well, it actually goes a bit further than that, because, the reason why we had Professor David Howarth come out from Cambridge, Professor of Law and Public Policy, because he was making the point that it's, in his little book, Law is Engineering, but he said he could have been entitled Legal by Design, and that the two processes of what the lawyers do and the engineers do align.
Yeah.
And this is actually quite important because if you're an engineer, a designer, or an architect designer, but somebody who designs in the real world, you have to look at it from the point of view of the legal design process as well. And the Section 22 of the WHS legislation and the OHS Act in Victoria and the WHA legislation in New Zealand is crystal clear on the duty of designers.
Yes. It now spells it out, doesn't it?
Does. Now, in that regard, the bit that's always caused the most confusion, and this is something we're not absolutely crystal clear on, there's all these people saying that reasonably practicable is the same for as low as reasonably practicable and for so far as reasonably practicable. But what Joe Coleiro is going to be talking about is the fact it's not the reasonably practical part that's the difficult part. It's actually the SFA, so far as that is the hard part, and that is an objective test. Now, I've read this in other books by other lawyers, Sheriff and Toomer, particularly understanding WHS legislation, and they talked about an objective test. But I've always wondered exactly what they meant by that, because
hopefully Joe will explain it to us all on
in more detail. But one of the things that Joe did make clear when we talked to him about this was that using a target level of risk and safety, you're saying this is the level of risk I'm willing to accept on your behalf, and that is definitely a subjective test, and that we understood.
Or the level of risk that you will accept as me giving it to somebody else.
How you do an objective test, which is what the SFA is sort of strange because it has other meanings, but anyway, what so far as actually means is quite different. And it actually flows through to the AFAP principle in Victoria for the Electrical Safety Act and things like that. So this is not a legally clean area.
No, open to interpretation potentially.
And that then flows on to Frank, who obviously is an architect, as a designer, and he's given a lot of advice on the foreshore and how to protect people. But you have this interesting conflict between people who don't want to have the foreshore surrounded by fences and have it open and clear from the usability of people, people
amenity
and view and all the rest of it, versus the possibility of somebody
drowning.
Correct.
And we have many of those locations in Australia here.
Very much. And a lot of utilities in Australia have this problem, and we've seen this problem many times, haven't we?
And I think that's always been the most difficult part is what is the SOFA? What is that balance between safety and all of those other things that people want to achieve as part of their project or of their organisation?
Now, I've had, Frank calls me up periodically when he's got an interesting problem, and I've had long conversations because Frank's, one of his more recent jobs has been helping design the Auckland airport because his PhD's in CEPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. So he's particularly familiar with the complexities and also the contradictions, between cost and projects with a fixed price, and yet we've now got this mandated requirement that you must achieve SFAIRP for all designs. And this is not working well.
No, so how do you balance it all?
Well, you might recall when we did the review, or we did the short course for the assessors for Engineers Australia, that's for CPD. And they sort of said, well, what was the percentage of engineers
who... It was tiny, who actually thought that the WHS legislation, OHS legislation was relevant to them. And it was, 2 and 3 out of 100 applicants that have been there. And that was just mind-blowing. And then of those couple, there were many that they mainly didn't even understand the difference between the two.
Correct. And that, for the people assessing, yes, well, I'm having an interesting time with Engineers Australia because I got CPD points to assess, but we won't go into that conversation now. But it's, sorry.
That's all right. So I think the most important part for our forum is, and as Richard said, you would have heard him and I talk a number of times, and what our views are will be that interaction. So the plan is for the gentlemen to give their 15 and 20-minute little blast at the start, break for morning tea, and then come back and have this discussion around these things. And, some of those problems of ISO 31000, are you still using target levels of risk and safety, and how you meet the requirements of the legislative requirements while still achieving a safe environment at a reasonable cost, whatever that is.
And that's in the context of the planning legislation tends to seem to ignore the implications of the WHS Act, which is something we truly do not understand.
We've said this on a number of occasions, but, we really are talking about those critical rare things, those things that can kill and maim, which is what the legislation is aimed at.
Correct.
So the intent is we're hoping to have the interesting conversation afterwards, and we will be welcoming questions from the audience, both online and in person. The session will be recorded, and, we're hoping for one of these really, and I think really debating and thought-provoking sessions. Might not come back with all the answers, hopefully not more questions than answers, but that would be the intent of the session. So we hope you've enjoyed a little preview of what the live forum will be there, and I hope you can join us at the live forum. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Gaye.